This is from Excel to SQL Server. We'll be going over if you have an existing Excel document, how can you get that Excel table from that file to SQL. So we'll be going over how to draft the create table SQL script within Excel that you can copy and paste into Management Studio and execute to make your table there. And then we'll be going over how to import the data from your Excel into your new SQL table. If you're not able to stay for the entire video, here's the short version. Open up your Excel file and insert 2 new rows above your data. We will want to enter the data type and the max size so far in the data. If you don't know data types, you can go to Google and search SQL data types for a full list and suggestions. And then you can use the Excel formula shown in the middle here to find what is the length of the biggest cell within a column. And this will help us plan our SQL table later on, or plan our create table script later on. Next, copy those top 3 rows and paste them into a new sheet. You can do paste special to make sure no formulas are copied over. You just want to retain the values in there. Highlight that range and do Control-C. And then down below in a blank cell, click in that cell and then do Alt-ESE. This will transpose the data, or in other words, it'll rotate it like as shown in the second screenshot. Next, as you'll see in column H of the first screenshot, we did rename the columns to something more SQL-ese, I suppose. That'll be abbreviating words and replacing spaces with underscores. That is optional, but this does help Management Studio suggest column names as you're writing queries. So if you're good with the column name, that'll be used. Next, in column I, in the blank row up above, we started saying create table and gave it the name leases. And then below that, we started a formula to concatenate the column name with the data type and size. After you drag down that formula, you can then start making adjustments. So for example, those sizes that we first got, those were suggestions. So if we thought that the building name being max length 18 might be okay for now, but later on could be bigger, we decide to adjust it and make it size 50. So again, you can adjust the sizes for anything you think is appropriate. We can adjust some other things such as the date and date time columns. They don't need a size specified, so that size can be removed from the formula or removed from that cell. And likewise at the very bottom, such as for timestamp, we can remove the comma that's at the end there because that is the last item on the list. Next, you will want to copy and paste that script into Management Studio. So that's after you click on New Query to open up that window, then you'll paste the query in there. You can highlight the script, hit execute, and if you don't see your table yet, you can click on the blue refresh button, that blue arrow. That'll refresh your database, and then underneath the tables folder, then you'll see your new column, your new table there. This is just a quick side note. If you want to test for possible errors before executing a script, you can highlight the script and click on that check mark to the right of execute. And this will bring up any errors, such as here, I removed the data type originally for this example, and I got the error message, the definition for a column timestamp must include a data type. So parsing is a good way to check your script before you execute it officially. So once our SQL table is created, now we can import the data from the Excel file into it. To import data, you can right-click the database name and go to Tasks and then Import Data. It's found near the bottom. This will open up the import wizard. For data source, select Microsoft Excel and then browse for your file. When working with SQL Express, I find it easier to save the file as the Microsoft Excel 97 to 2003, and then likewise for the Excel version, select it again here, and then hit next. When choosing destination, choose Microsoft OLE DB provider for SQL Server. When working in other servers, such as for my day job, I have seen and use SQL Server native client. That's my preference, but I know it's been working in this SQL Express. I didn't see it here, but this bottom option essentially brought the same window, so you'll be fine. That'll update this screen so the server name and database name will already be filled in for you. Because remember, you had right-clicked the database name to select import data, so it already knew this. But it's good to double check to make sure you're importing the right place. For authentication, this will be the same authentication or credentials used to sign into your server, which is very likely still Windows authentication, so you can hit next. On the next screen, we want to keep the first selection selected for copy data from one or more tables. Hit next. This is where you're going to map, or first off, on the left-hand side, these are the different sheets in your Excel file. And then on the right-hand side, that's where you're going to say what what SQL table you will import into. So on the left-hand side, I want to import the sheet called import, so I check that box. And then on the right-hand side, you can either type in the table name, but just be aware that makes it easy to make typos, so you can use a drop-down to select it there, and you can see that way the schema was also in there. Or if you have a lot of tables in your SQL database, maybe you have the official name and schema within your notes somewhere, you can copy and paste that way, as opposed to typing it in each time. So one thing to know is when a existing table is properly filled in on the right-hand side, you'll notice the icon change from this gray table to this really pretty white and blue table. Very, very important. Before you hit next, hit edit mappings. So this will allow you to map columns from the Excel sheet to the columns in the SQL table. So it'll do its best to map these for you, but you can change them if needed. In the destination column, you can click in that cell and be a drop down to show any available columns that you can still map to the SQL column. Very, very important note, look at the size column. If you see the size default to 255, stop. If you meant to import into a existing table, then you probably have a typo in there. So you can look at the top, you see the destination, DBO, leases, and make sure there's no typo there. If there is, you can close this pop-up window to bring you back to the previous page and enter the table name again. But that 255 or size 255 is a great indicator to make sure you're going in the right place, or you're importing in a existing table that you were expecting to go to. Once you're done with edit mappings, you can hit OK on that pop-up screen, then you can hit next. They'll bring you to this window. You don't have to change anything, just hit next. Leave the option as run immediately, just hit next. This is the final screen. It's a good chance to review, is the right Excel file being imported, is it going to the right SQL table? Note that it says it's going to an existing table, yada yada. If everything looks okay, you can just hit finish. The import wizard will show you how many rows were transferred. When everything is done, you see successful, or you see success, you're good, you can hit close. Now for the quick cleanup part. So for example, back in our SQL, or back in our Excel table, remember we were adding rows, we were working in extra places. And so one thing I would suggest is before we import that data, we probably should have highlighted the empty rows below our data and deleted them, just to make sure there were no, I guess, quote unquote, ghost rows. because that's what happened here. We somehow imported rows that were null. To do some cleanup, you can use the delete from script and make sure that you are deleting particular rows, and this will be based off of what you enter in the where clause. So we search for where the building name is null, and when you do these kinds of edits, I highly recommend wrapping begin tran, rollback, and commit around these updates. So when working with this, you highlight from begin tran to the end of your where clause, as shown in the screenshot here. Then you can execute, and you can see it'll show you how many rows were affected. So keep that number in mind. You can also highlight the select query you see up above to view that table before you save changes. If the table looks okay, then you can highlight the word commit and execute, or click the execute button, and that will save your changes. If, for example, you forgot to highlight the where clause as you were highlighting from begin tran through delete from, if you forgot to include the where clause or the where clause wasn't specific enough, it deleted maybe too much data, then you can highlight the rollback word and then execute, and that'll roll back or undo the change you just did. And with that, let's get started. Hey there, welcome back. Let's pretend that you have a Microsoft Excel file that you like to convert to SQL Server. Or rather, you have a table in Excel that you would like to move over to SQL Server. In this example, I'm going to be working with a list of, let's say, different leases for multiple buildings. We have different data types. For example, we have, a column with a bunch of text. We have a building IDs column, which, if you note, these, even though they are numbers, they are treated as the type text, and the reason is they have leading zeros, and I don't want to lose the leading zeros, so I treat them as strings. Likewise for telephone numbers, yes, they are numbers, but there's also different symbols, parentheses, dashes, periods, so everything within a cell is not entirely numeric. We also have some dates, some amounts, and date time. So to get started, let's add a new row. And we want to know what is the max length of the biggest cell within a column. This is going to help us plan for creating a table down the road, because depending on the data type, we'll have to specify what is the max character limit. And I'm going to show you a formula that you can use. So up at the top, I'll do give me the length, and I want to find the biggest cell. So I'll do index data, that's my data, match max length data, length data. There we go. Now let's see if I typed it in right. Yay, there we go. So the formula found what's the biggest cell in here and gave me the length. Likewise, if I take out the len and parentheses, then it shows me what is the biggest cell, and it's super amazing how. So I'll put the len back in there. And in case you would like this for your notes, here, I'll put it. Yeah, let me take out the equal sign. There we go. This is the formula that I was typing in. Replace data with you highlighting the data that you want to specify, and you'll be all set there. I'm going to drag this across, and we won't need this value for every column, but this is just to give you a head start. So now that we have an estimate of our biggest length, let's use or let's put some notes down on the data types that we think these columns are going to be. Now, one thing that I recommend is going to Google and type in SQL data types and look for a link for W3 schools. This website is a fantastic reference. So if you scroll down, you'll see there are different data types for strings, such as car, varchar, tiny text. Keep scrolling down to the numeric data types. Here you'll have your small n, integer, float, double. Then you have your dates, your date, date time, timestamp, year, etc. So personally, some of the data types that I have seen used a lot were varchar, int, decimal, datetime, and date. But this gives you a lot more flexibility for whatever your specific needs are. So feel free to save this link in your notes because it is awesome. So I'm going to go back to our Excel now. Okie doke. So first off, our building names. So you can see they can be different lengths. We have some smaller names, larger names. So I'm going to call this column, it's a varchar, because it can be variable characters. Now for our building ID, again, even though it's a number, I'm treating it as a text field so we don't lose those zeros, whether in Excel or in a SQL Server. And if you notice, they're all 3 characters long. So to help preserve this, I'm going to call it car, because I don't want a building ID to be 5 characters long, 2, 1, I want it to be 3. So car is more set on the size, while varchar, you have some flexibility up to the max limit that you give it. For a telephone number, I'm also going to use varchar. For our lease start date and end date, there are no times tagged onto it like the timestamp. So I'm going to put date. Okay, so next up we have our auto renew column. So you'll see there's only 1 character limit. We only have Y for yes and for no. Just to be safe, I'll use car. Honestly, with just a limit of 1 or a length of 1, varchar or car, either one would work. I'll just leave it at that for now. For the amount, I'll do decimal. For modified by, I'll say varchar again, because let's pretend you have multiple users. People could have different length names, so it could be longer, shorter, anything works. And then for our timestamp, we have a date and a time, so that will be date time. Please ignore the puppy in the background. So now we have our data types and our sizes and our column names. So I'm going to highlight everything, Control C to copy, make a new sheet, click an A1, Control V to paste. Everything in there were formulas, so I'm actually going to go back, copy again, come back over here, and I'll do paste special. There we go. So now there's no more formulas, I have just the values. So the gist of what I'm going to do is to start preparing this in a way that we can just copy and paste this into Management Studio so we can create our table. So in other words, I'm going to prepare a SQL, it's not a query, I'll call it a query. I'll prepare a SQL query to make our table. Or a SQL statement, it's not a query. Anyway, I'm going to highlight, Control C to copy, I'm going to click, I'll click over here. And I'm going to do Alt, ESE. Again, I was holding down Alt the whole time, and then I just pressed ESE. And now you can see that the transpose option was already selected. I'll hit OK. You can see everything got pivoted over. So we have our data type, our sizes, and our column name. So while looking online, you might see, any jokes or comics about, if you're working in SQL, first step, hit the caps lock. And it's pretty common, pretty true. Let's go ahead and translate this to SQLese. So you can keep these column names as is. That's totally fine. The only thing is, for the column names that have a space in it, you can still work with those, but the only thing is when you're trying to write a query, Management Studio will try to guess the column that you want to work with. And it's just easier when there's no spaces. So let's go over here, and I'll say name, I'll call it my building name. The ID column, I'll say this is my building ID. Telephone, short of just tel. Lease, start date, lease, end date. I'll call that the renew flag. For lease amount, I'll just say amount. Modified by and timestamp. So if there were any spaces, I just replaced it with a underscore. So now just start preparing what we will execute in SQL Server. At the top of our executable, we are going to type in create table, and let's give it a name. Let's call it leases, open parentheses. And now at the bottom, we'll do our closing parentheses. And as we fill it in our statement here, we are going to concatenate the column name, data type, and the character limit. So let's go over here and just do equals our column name, and I'll do ampersand, quotation marks, space, quotation marks, ampersand. So again, using the and symbol, use quotes, putting a space in between the quotes, okay? I'm going to click on our data type, do the same thing, and add a space. Actually, no, I'll do and, open parentheses, quotation marks, put in the size, and at the end of this, let's add a comma and our ending quotation marks. There we go. So we've successfully concatenated our column name, data type, and max limit. I'm just going to drag this down. See, now that we have our executable statement drafted. Now we need to look over a few things, make some edits. So let's look at the building name. Even though the biggest name at this time is 18 characters long, what if down the line we get a building where the building name is 30 characters long? What if it's 40? I'm going to go back over here and I am going to update this to, let's just say 50. Now for our building ID, remember we saw all of these were 3 characters long. We're going to be locked in with the car as well, and I want to make sure it stays 3, so I'll keep it as 3 for here. For our telephone number, depending on how the number is inputted, there might be an additional couple digits added at the beginning of a phone number, and maybe in different regions around the world, maybe they enter their phone numbers differently. I don't know. I should look that up, but I didn't. So, just in case, I am going to update this to, let's just say 20 characters. That's probably way more than needed, but this is just an example. For our 2 date columns, the date data type actually doesn't need that size. So I'm going to trim that off of the formula. Here we go. And I'll just copy and paste that for the other one. So I just trimmed off where we had entered the parentheses and data size. So we just have our column name and data type. Our auto renews flag column, again, we had chosen car, and so for our car, and we're not going to give it a large data size because we want consistency. We don't want users to enter the word yes sometimes and enter the letter Y to represent yes sometimes. We want consistency in all of our data input. So I'll leave that as 1. For decimal is a little bit different. So if we say decimal 6, we're saying the number could have 6, placeholders. So for example, if it was decimal 4, then you're saying maybe the max dollar amount could be, or a dollar amount could be $1,000. 1000. There's 4 placeholders there. So in this case, but we want a decimal place, we want change, we want cents. So I'm actually going to copy, paste special to get rid of the formula. So I'll do 6,2. So there could be 6 digits in the amount, and 2 of them could be change. So for example, you could have, $1,000 and 10 cents as a lease amount. And now for modify by, again, what if you have multiple users and they have different last names or first names, or however way you organize your modify by? 7 may not be big enough. So for this example, I'll say 50 characters is the max limit. And then for date time, again, we don't need the size. And actually, because it's the last column in this table, we can take off the comma. So now we're just left with column name, date time, left off the comma. We are prepared. We're done. We're good. Don't forget to save your work. Now we can highlight this whole thing, copy it, and hop over to Management Studio. So let's go ahead and do just that. There we go. Open up our tables here. And if you want to, you can hit execute. If you want to test it out first, see if any errors come up, you can hit this check mark here for parse. You can see commands completed successfully. Now, if you had clicked on your database and refresh, no new tables were created because we didn't actually execute it. Now, for example, what if we take off the data type down here? We get that red squiggle. And if you just hover your mouse over it, it'll tell you what's wrong. It says, the definition for column timestamp must include a data type. But in case you missed it for whatever reason, again, you can highlight and do parse. And it'll tell you down there too, you're missing your data type. Oop, not data type. Datetime, there we go. Now that we are good to go, we want to highlight, execute. So now if you don't see your table yet, click on your database name, hit the blue refresh button, expand your tables, and there we go. There's our leases table. You can do right click and select top 1000 rows. There's no data in here right now, but our table is created. Now, if for whatever reason, maybe you had created 2 tables, maybe called it, one table leases and the other table building leases, so maybe that name, the different names was how you got 2 tables in the first place. Now you want to drop one. Well, now you can say drop table leases. And as I was typing, Management Studio actually brought up a suggestion of what it thinks I want. And here, I'll do one more thing. Select all from leases. So you can see when I executed the select, the table did come up without errors. So now if I highlight, drop table, execute, command's completed successfully, I can refresh my database, and it's not there. So if I try to select star from it again, invalid object, because it doesn't exist anymore. So I can recreate that again, and there you go. And you don't have to keep records of how you create tables, because actually if you go into your tables folder, you can right click and do script table as, create to, a new window. And there's your create table query right there. It did add a few extra things like null. Null means nothing, meaning a column that is null can contain nothing. It doesn't need data. If a column had not null, that means not nothing. The column has to have data. So there you go. In another video, we'll be covering inserts a lot more in depth, but since we're here, when in Rome. Let's go back to our data. And actually, I'll make a copy of this sheet, and I'll just rename the tab import. So what I'm going to do now is import this Excel into SQL Server. And some of the prep work is you only want your column names and the data, and that's it. If there's any data above or below, to the side, get rid of it, clean it out. You just want the raw data. So one thing that I've noticed with at least SQL Express or SQL Server Express is when I went to when I went to upload or import the data into Management Studio, it didn't like the data type or the file type. Meaning it didn't like the normal Excel workbook. But I learned if you use the 97 to 2003 template or workbook, there we go, let's use this one. If you use the 97 to 2003 workbook, it'll ingest it better. So I'm going to select that option, save this file again, and then we'll hop back over to Management Studio. Okay, so we're back in Management Studio. So if you see, if we do a select star from leases, the table did pull up, but there's no data. So we want to import what we had in Excel. So let's right click on our database name, go to tasks, and import data. It'll bring up this import wizard. Click next. We have to choose a data source. I'm going to choose Excel. And choose our file. So one thing that I've noticed, at least with the free SQL Server Express, I've had to save my Excel files as the 97 to 03 version, and then it would go in just fine. For hosted SQL servers, I haven't had to change that type. Normal Excel workbooks went in just fine. For choose a destination, I want it on our SQL server. On our server name, it'll already be defaulted. For the authentication method, this will be the same way that you signed into your server. So that'll be Windows authentication most likely. And make sure the database name is correct. Hit next. I'll keep it as copy data from one or more tables or views. Next. On the left-hand side, these will be your different sheets within your Excel document. I want to import the sheet that I renamed to import. And on the right-hand side, if you already have an existing table that you want to import the data into, this is where you can either copy-paste the name in there or use the drop-down. So I'll use the drop-down because that'll have the schema. And now that I've clicked away, this icon updated to be more of a pretty table-looking icon. Before you hit next, always hit edit mappings because you want to make sure it did register right. A couple things to note on this page. If you see the size be defaulted to 255, that means whatever table that you insert in here, maybe there's a typo or something, but either way, it doesn't think you want to work in a existing table. So seeing 255 in the size is one hint to make sure there are no typos. The other thing is you want to make sure the column names from your Excel workbook are being mapped to the correct column in your SQL table. And it'll do actually a pretty good job trying to match up what it thinks should go together. So name, building name, FRID, telephone number, release start date, end date, renew. Everything looks good. Okay. And if you had additional columns in your SQL table that were not mapped anywhere else, if you clicked on this drop down on any of these, you'll see the other options available. But since all columns were used up, we don't have any extra ones to choose from. So I'll hit OK. Okay, next. I don't want to change anything else on this page. I'll hit next again. And I want to run immediately. Next. So this is where you can check one last time the source location, the location of your Excel file, the file name. Are you importing it to the right table that you are expecting? And again, it'll check, it'll insert new rows into an existing table. It won't try to make a new one. So if everything looks good, hit finish. You can see 15 rows were transferred. I can just hit close. So now if I do my select again, our data made it in. So it looks like when I was working in Excel, I had a few extra rows come over. So let's clean this up a bit. So whenever you are doing some kind of update or alter to a table, it's good to do wrap begin trend, rollback, and commit. So let's do delete from leases, where building name is null. So let's actually check to see if we do just a select what comes up. So let's do, there we go. So we have 3 rows come up if we do select on that table where building name is null. So let's do begin tran, delete from that table where building name is null. And I'm not highlighting rollback or commit, I'm just doing this part. Execute. 3 rows were affected. Before I commit, I'm going to double check my work, make sure everything looks okay. So I'll do select on the table and see those 3 are gone. So now if I just highlight the front and leave off the where clause, I can see how this table looks now, and it looks so much better. If the update did not look right, I can highlight rollback, execute, and now look at that again, and you can see all that has returned because I rolled back the change I made. I am going to do it again. 3 rows affected. Always, always, always double check your work. Everything looks okay. So now I can highlight commit, execute, and that commit will save the changes. There we go. Everything is good. If I try to commit again or roll back, nothing is going to happen because the transaction is done, it is saved, it is locked in. And there you go. So you have moved over your Excel table to SQL Server and imported your data. Good job!